is to go back to where we ended on Tuesday, and is to talk about being, right? Being instead of doing. Who will we be? Who are we already? But I'm curious about how you contemplated those questions from the connections worksheet. Uh, what connections you have, what connections can you strengthen, and what connections can you build? So I'm curious if you want to share, what connections did you discover that you already have that are strong, that you know you're going to rely on? What connections can you strengthen? Do you see that have waned that you want to strengthen? And then what are connections that you desire to build? So if you want to answer all three of those, if you want to choose just one, you choose whatever it is you want to share about the discoveries you're making in doing this, asking these questions.
So I'll answer the ones that I want to build. I'm excited to look at some volunteer possibilities, and I've got some in mind already. Probably won't start until after our COVID stuff has been settled, and I'm excited about the possibility of joining a new congregation and shopping around to find what's the right congregation for us in developing relationships within that congregation.
That sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Yeah. Thanks for that, Brenda. Other reflections.
Well, I kind of did the low hanging fruit, I think.
Yeah.
These are things that I do already. So like golf, I love bluegrass, and playing and stuff. And I look forward to getting, more of a group together. And, we walk, my wife and I, and so those were kind of easy. But, after our talk about how, we know is a good word to use when you retire and that type of thing, I'm kind of on the fence. I love, studying. I love reading, but I won't be preaching. So, I mean, what's the motivation? Maybe just to study, but I'm kind of rethinking that. I think there's going to be a lot of options online for connections as well, as that kind of continues to evolve. So, and I'd like to start writing, actually trying to write. I do it already, but not with any real purpose. Well, like my sermons and articles, but it'd be fun to try to write a book. I don't know what about, but
That sounds like a great building project.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Tim, I'd say about you call it low hanging fruit. I know plenty of pastors who don't know how to play. And so just that the things that bring you joy,
Oh yeah.
you can name those and that you're ready for those. I think
Yeah.
that's, good. I'm glad you have some low hanging fruit.
I'm going to turn that metaphor upside down because they're roots, Tim.
Oh, good idea.
And they're
Good
strong,
idea.
and that's good.
Yeah.
Good idea. I like that.
Well, I like how too the thing that you want to build, figuring out how to write more, is also tied to what you're gonna kind of be giving up with that weekly writing of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I want to record music too. I've never recorded music, so writing and recording and that creative part,
John.
I want to nurture that.
Mhm. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Other reflections?
I'm not going to be retired. Kevin is, but I'm not. But the exercise in doing that is realizing how many things that bring me life that I'm not doing.
Mm,
So we'll have to work on that. Like traveling, we can't do because we can't, because it's COVID. And I can't sing in groups because it's COVID. So COVID has restricted a lot of the things that bring me life. But there's other things I can do, like read for fun. Does anybody do that? I'm looking forward to doing that. In the summer, sometimes I do, but spending more time with family and friends. And you all know that when you work every Sunday, it makes it difficult to spend time with family if they're not close by, family and friends. So silence. It's hard to find silence, I think. So yeah, there's lots of things that would be good to do when COVID's over, and also figure out how I can monitor myself. So I spend time for me.
At our pain clinic, I don't know, they teach some things that I just think every person in the entire world should be learning about. And so for people with chronic pain, they have to learn moderation, but also modification, right? And our hesitancy during COVID to modify some of the things we used to do, it's not the same. It won't be the same. So we have to modify it, but it's still, if it's still human connection, it's still, or whatever connection, and gives us the meaning, it's worth doing. So yeah. How can something still be available to you even if there are limitations?
Yeah, and it sounds like it agitated you a little bit too, Denise, or just, thought, wait a minute, why aren't I doing these things? That's good. I'm glad.
So on that same note, one of the things that I think about is when I retire, I'm going to sleep enough. And then I think, well, why don't I do that now? Like it would help.
Maybe you can't sleep.
Well,
One
there
of the
is that.
one of the things that happened in retirement to me is when I was working, I would be up about 5:30 in the morning, and then I would work for like 2 hours, and then go to work. And then after I retired, I was still getting up at 5:30 in the morning with absolutely no reason to do it. And I had a retired friend who had been a high school principal, and he'd been retired a few years, and he said, just give it time, give it time. But it took a while for that, for me to be able to sleep till 6:30. And my dad used to get up at that on small g godly hour, and I thought he was nuts. But that's an adjustment. It's funny, the body and the mind and the spirit to just slow down. Yeah.
I just want to note that our colleagues here in Arizona, you seem to have sunlight streaming in your windows. Is that?
We do.
Yeah.
I just was noticing in both. I was like, it's still sunny there. It's not here.
I looked it up. I think our days here are about an hour and a half longer than they are in Minnesota,
Okay.
Wow.
give or take. Yeah.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure you both didn't, I don't know, I know you're in different places, but I thought, okay, I think it's still sunny there. Okay, pardon me. Any other sharings that anything you want to share about what you discovered?
One thing I discovered on well, I don't think I discovered it, but it reaffirmed it for me because COVID has interrupted so many things. We've been blessedly, immune to a lot of the impacts of COVID in our retirement because of where we live and who lives close to us and that sort of thing. So it's, except the box at the bottom with the spiritual strength ones, I might be getting ahead of us, but I really miss in-person worship
Oh,
and in-person Bible study. That I was really counting on that for connections, because I was leaving all those connections behind and I have to start from scratch. And it's all been delayed. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm counting on that for not just spiritual strength, but new connections. That's been something that I've experienced as a loss, but temporarily.
Yeah. Yeah, knowing that it's temporary helps.
Yeah.
But- Were there any great surprises as you asked these questions? Or as you talk to your spouse about this, if you're married, any surprises that emerged?
I think I realized different things I've really put on hold, and so for me, I realized, where are my friends? Who are my friends? And that's been a void. And so so looking at reconnecting with those few people that I know I want to connect with, that. And the other thing that surprised me, I was just going through some stuff and came across a box. I used to make cards, and also in that box was a needlepoint that my mother had started, and I do needlepoint. And I realized that creative side of me. I'm creative, like Tim said, with writing sermons and other things, but that hands-on creative stuff I have really neglected. And so the other night I just made a couple of cards, and that was it was life-giving to reconnect to that.
Good for you.
I would say too that a surprise for me was to start to look at connections in terms of, the kinds of hobbies or artistic pursuits that you are doing already, but maybe don't do enough of. For instance, I like to garden, and this year my garden was pretty good because COVID kept me nearby and I could look out the window and say, oh, there's a weed. I better go out and get that one. I could at least be outside for a second. And so gardening is one of the things that I love to do. Bike riding, I used to do a lot of, not so much the last couple of years, but I'll have time for that. And I hope that I get to do some bike riding. And we put together puzzles. We've done that times, and I'm hoping that a little here this I can, because I really didn't want to have 1,000 pieces of jigsaw puzzle laying on the table while little hands are going around grabbing them off and hiding the pieces. But those are things we like to do too. So there's a lot of stuff that can fill time and be healthy and keep you active. And that's the thing that work always got in the way of for me. I had to give up something. So even though I got up early in the morning and I had a little bit of time to myself to read, trying to get some exercise in amongst everything else that had to get done, that's the first thing you have to jettison. So now there won't be an excuse for throwing stuff out. You can do it all. Well, maybe not all.
I was going to say, ooh, I feel like Mark or Rick,
So maybe I've changed my perspective on retirement in the last 2 days from relief, to that freedom mode of, wow, there's a lot of stuff I can do now that I don't have to do these things that I'm obligated to do while I'm under call.
There's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, freedom and opportunity go hand in hand.
And as a good spouse, I don't get up till 6 o'clock. He gets up at 4:30. So I give him an hour and a half of his own time.
30.
And for you readers, you know, I learned long ago, for me, I needed to read fiction, not just theology books, but I needed to read stories because it would help with my preaching, to just listen to the words and how they flow, and that I can put stories together and paint word pictures and stuff like that. So I think a good mix of stuff. I'll always be interested in subjects, but I'll also read some good fiction too.
I'm curious if anyone discovered anything that you thought that you're gonna uproot, that you don't want that to be. Do you have any ideas about what you don't want to have part of your retirement life, living into that?
Meetings. I'm not going to retire for a really long time, but that will be one. I cannot make it to your meeting. I'll do something, but no, I'll be over here.
Well, Rick kind of scared me yesterday when he talked about you spend a lot of time with your spouse, you know, in a small enclosure. And, you know, we're not used to that. You know, she works, I work. I mean, some days we hardly see each other. I'm just thinking that's really something we should probably address, you know, and talk about. We don't know where we're going to live yet. I'd like to go south, but she's got really white skin and she hates hot weather. But gee, in the winter, it's not that hot, is it, down there?
No, it's not.
No, it isn't. Yeah.
No,
It's yeah. I've got a sister living down there, and she's married to a Church of Christ pastor, but now it's called Broadway Christian Church in Mesa, Arizona. So he's kind of a character, but so anyway, we have to kind of talk more about that. You know, how do you spend your time? I mean, you just kind of hang out with each other.
One of the advantages that we have found with COVID is when COVID hit, I started working exclusively from home doing telehealth. And Art works almost exclusively from our home because his secretary wants to be in the office, and they decided that only one person should be in the office. And so he can work from home. We're both in the same home, working together, or both working in different parts of the house, but we kind of like being under the same roof most of the time.
Yeah. As long as you're not in each other's way. So the one thing I did tonight, though, I asked my wife, what kind of connections do you see yourself having? And she is an artist, you know, so she would like to have an art studio. So I can imagine she's going to be busy there, and I'll probably be, you know, have my projects, and that's probably how we'll do it too. Because yeah, you're right. Sometimes you don't have to be doing something. It's nice just being under the same roof, you know, and not necessarily doing activities together, but you meet for lunch or something like that.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
Rick, Art, do you
that's
wanna-
what we kind of do, especially here in the winter because there's so many activity groups. And Nancy has hers and I have mine. Well, she has more than I do. she's much better at that activity stuff than I am. That's one of the things I missed with COVID. I haven't had a chance to really discover those things. But the other thing that occurs to me that has helped us is that we, prior to retirement, we had what I think is a pretty egalitarian marriage with respect to all the stuff you have to do to keep a home going. And so we didn't face that adjustment of, okay, how are we going to split the dishwashing and laundry and who's going to clean the toilet and all that kind of stuff. We already were we had settled into a pretty egalitarian 50-50 mode long time ago. So that helped us. And I think from what I've heard from others, that can be a little bit rocky to figure that out. You know, sometimes I tend to rearrange the dishwasher before it gets washed because I'm more efficient with it. But I'm getting better about that.
My husband does that too. I said, is this like packing for vacation? Is this just like jumping in the trunk? Like, okay, you go for it. It's a skill. Rick, anything to add there just about how you and your spouse spend your time?
Yeah, it was, I'm trying to think. I mean, because it really was a change because, you know, as everybody on the screen knows, you know, there were weeks where I was gone 6 nights a week, you know, working, and my wife and we have 2 girls, and they talk about things that the girls did when they were young, and I have no memory of those things. And it's like, whoa, where was I? You know, I don't know, I was there. But so making that transition, but my wife is behind me, she could add, but it was really pretty seamless. And but I guess I echo Mark, is that the roots were there, and yeah, because we've spent a lot of time in a very small number of cubic feet through our retirement. And the house we bought in Minnesota is really very small as well. As long as she has her TV and I have my TV, and she can go running and I can do my stuff and I can be out, you know, it just works.
Mhm.
But it is an important part of retirement, that transition, if one is married, because it's different.
Yeah.
Well, and I think just to give people permission and just to say, yep, that's a transition, that's a part of living in
Mhm.
retirement, that will be different. Just so you know, like, oh, this is normal. This
Yeah,
this
yeah.
weird off kilter thing now is normal. It's important to know that. Yeah, for those of you that are married, did you learn anything surprising about your spouse through digging into these questions?
No.
Well, that's fair. That's a good answer, right? Fair
What you
answer.
see is what you get.
We were kind of old when we got married. We were 2 old bachelors used to going our own way, and we kind of still do that.
You're gonna be just fine then.
Once in a while, we have a joint venture.
Oh. Well, let's turn to our retired folks, our panel here, our 2 panelists. And you tell us what connections have you relied upon most heavily since being retired, and how have you tended to them? How have you cared for those connections?
Well, for me, it's been family. We that has been a real important connection that I've made, my wife and I've made, especially with my parents and our younger daughter and her husband and their grandbaby and our grandbaby, their daughter. We see them frequently, and that has been, especially with COVID, just a real critical part of life for us in terms of life feeling like it has meaning and purpose. I'm able to support my parents. They're 90 and 91, make it possible for them to be in Tucson still. Our kids, our daughter and son-in-law and grandbaby are, we watch her a couple times a week and see them regularly, and they support us in some ways and we support them in some ways. For me, that's given my life some meaning and purpose, which I was kind of wondering about going into retirement, what would fulfill that sense of meaning and purpose. So in the last year and a half, it's been family for me. That's been the primary one.
One of the things that was unique about our retirement is moving back to a community that we'd lived in for 13 years. So we had all of these friendships that were there, that most of which had to be restarted again. And of course, then COVID messed everything up. But that was one of the reasons, especially for my wife, to be back with a very few people, but that she was good friends with. And, and that's been a real bonus. And, just last night we had a Zoom with 3 other couples that we call it Wine Wednesday. We used to get together in person every Wednesday night after choir, and they'd all drink wine, and I don't like wine, so I drink other things and they make fun of me. But we continue to do that on Zoom, and it's just fun to just connect and have those relationships and have relationships. It's been fun even moving back to a community where people were friends and they don't care what I did for a living. And it's always there, but it's not what the relationship is built on. We're just friends. And that's a change in retirement is, am I still a pastor? Well, yeah, according to the ELCA, I am. I'm on the roster, but it's not what I do, and it's not as much who I am, and that impacts relationships with people. I mean, you've all experienced that when you get to meet somebody, and then they figure out who you are and what you do, and then it changes things. And that's been fun. That's been fun. The other thing that, to echo Mark, is I'm the youngest of 4 boys, and my relationship with my 3 older brothers is communication with them is much more important than it ever was before. Especially the oldest one has had a pretty severe scare with cancer. And then the next one, who's 8 years older than I, as we look back over the last 3 years, dementia has just taken over his life. And so the other 3 of us try to figure out, how do we do this with him and how do we support him? And, because we all get older. And that aging is part of the relationships too.
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Well, I was just going to say, it reminds me of your go, slow go, no go. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. We don't know when those slow goes and no goes are going to hit.
Right.
We have no idea.
I'm struck a little bit by each of your sharing that the mutuality of relationships, that the meaning that comes in giving love and receiving love and all that relationships have to exchange. It's like that symbiotic nature of the trees and their roots communicating. And when there's more need here, the trees share, and the brothers are doing that for the one brother.
Mhm.
And the being a grandparent, I have a theory. When I was in Hawaii on my internship, woo, I was so lucky. I got to hear Madeline L'Engle speak,
Mm.
which was glorious. And it was during prime surfing season, and she had been up on the North Shore, and she saw on a day only professional surfers could be out there because the waves were so huge and dangerous. And it was just this powerful experience for her. And when she spoke to our group, said, I think the angels taught humans how to surf. And when we think about the power of God and the chaos of the ocean, and that maybe only angels would know how to negotiate that. They shared the secret with us. So I've thought for a long time that grandparents have this kind of, I don't know, by the time you get there, there's some kind of transcendent love that you're given. And that the most powerful love that you can give or receive as a human being is a grandparent's love. It's such a holy calling.
Pretty unconditional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had
one of
the
the-
great,
Go ahead, Tim.
I had a great grandpa, and I keep, now that I'm a grandpa, I keep thinking, am I measuring up? But it was such a different time, it was such a different time when I had him, but I think about that all the time because it really is a special relationship. It really is.
When I would meet with couples before they got married, we would do prepare with them. And I'm assuming it's the same for most of you, that 90% of the couples that I married were already living together. And as it evolved over the years, because I would do a lot of weddings, like 15, 20 a year. And the first question I asked when we sat down in the first session, if they were living together, was, tell me about your last date. And then there'd be this silence because they'd almost all stop dating. And then the woman would usually look kind of concerned and the guy would look pretty clueless. But and then I'd tell him, I said, you have already made decisions that are going to lead to the end of your marriage because you have stopped tending this relationship. And I meant it. How have you tended relationships? Well, you got to look at where's your time going, and when we retire, we have more time, and how much of that time is going to go into relationships. I don't know.
I think it was Rob Bell who talks about, he and his wife wrote a book on marriage, where it's sort of like they have a conversation back and forth through the text. And I've liked it. It's very accessible for couples to read too. One of the things they talk about is, they said instead of working on their marriage, they play at their marriage.
Mhm.
They play through their marriage. They just try and, instead of putting, like, they have date nights, but they try not to, like, they're trying to have fun with dishes and with, the day-to-day stuff, so that there's not all this pressure on the date, because then you end up angry at each other because there's so much pressure on it and it's a terrible date, and why did we do, and then you have a big fight on the way home or whatever, and so just that language of, we just try to play through our marriage and try to have that spirit about us, instead of trying to save it for one special occasion that then we end up at each other's throats because it's not very special.
Yeah.
So I have always found that, I've liked that advice. It sounded a little bit, Rick, like you were talking about things that have been strengthened since you retired, like your relationships with your brothers.
Mhm.
Are there other connections that have been strengthened that you would lift up? And Mark, I'd pose the same question to you too.
There were relationships that I was hoping would be. And one of the challenges that for me personally that I was faced at retirement and still am a little concerned about was that I don't make friends really easily. And friends in the congregation for me were friends, but they were always a arm's length distance because I'm the pastor. And so one of my concerns going, and still is how do I develop a friendship, with someone outside of my family? It's been put off because of COVID, but that's still a kind of an ongoing concern, and it may not be a unusual concern for pastors. I don't know about those of us who are gathered in this Zoom meeting tonight, but I kind of know that I need to figure that out and be intentional about it in some way that's different from before, because we moved away from our community, from where all the people we knew were. And that for me was kind of refreshing. I get to start from scratch, but I'm counting on some old friendships, like from college, made some connections already on phone calls and so forth. But I know that's going to be something that requires some real intentionality on my part.
One of the things that, speaking of friendships and marriage, I wanted to make sure I didn't forget this, because Laura sent us, Mark and I, a little bit of homework. One of the things that can change in terms of relationships is this. After I was elected bishop, I think it was the first January after that, we were in Savannah, Georgia. Every year, now it's every other year, bishops and spouses have a continuing education event, and they go someplace warm because they got to go somewhere. And we were in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't warm, by the way. But the spouses got together one afternoon or morning, I don't remember. And then afternoon, Diane and I were up in our hotel room, and I was asking her what they talked about. And I didn't know. I'm new at this game. I don't know what it's about. And all of a sudden she started to cry. And she doesn't cry a lot. But these tears were, man, it was like, whoa, geez, what's this about? And she said, we were talking about what we missed since our spouses got this new call. And she was crying. She said, because you're not my pastor anymore. She said, you've been my pastor almost my whole adult life. And now you're not. And I lost my pastor. And it's like, whoa. And of course, then I felt guilty, and that was not the point of the conversation, but that really struck us. And I wanted to make sure I brought that up, because in retirement, for those of you who are married, you might be losing your pastor. And that might be good news. I don't know, but but it's and I don't know, Mark, did you guys ever have any conversation about that?
No, we haven't. It's an interesting question. I haven't sensed that, but I don't know, because that hasn't come up.
Again, COVID.
Right. Yeah. I think we both were looking forward to sitting together in the pews.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that we both look forward to.
Pastors, not good pew sitters. I mean, isn't that a thing? It's a pretty hard transition.
It can be. The church shopping thing is interesting. That didn't last very long, but the hardest thing for me is listening to a sermon. Yeah, well, I have fairly high standards
An
with respect to
occupational hazard.
music and all that stuff, and so that's hard. Yeah, that's been hard for me.
My dad was a pastor all my life, and then whenever I would go to church with him after he was retired, he would lean over to me and say, "Jesus died for that."
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I've had to work really hard to be a pew sitter. And I thought,
ouch.
yeah, I know, right? Jesus died for that? I don't think so. Oh, so yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. What are you most happy about being retired?
I feel more relaxed. I like
Uh-huh.
that a lot. That's been really great. Um, I really like not feeling obligated.
Yeah.
That probably goes with the relaxation thing. I don't have to plan anything. I don't have to prepare anything. I don't even have to show up for anything. That to me has been just really like a burden that's been lifted, which I really appreciated that. I like that a lot. I really like the freedom with respect, especially with time and how I use it and how I don't have to be in a hurry ever, almost never. Really love being with family, children and grandchildren. And we got to choose our locations where we live that offers, I walk out my door and I'm on mountain trails here and up in Wisconsin, I walk out my door, I'm on the lake. The recreational opportunities that I have are never had that anything like that before.
Mm.
I really, really like that a lot.
Yeah, I would echo what Mark said is that, Bishop Anderson in Southwest Minnesota has asked me to do a couple of interims, and I would have said no anyway, but part of it is because I'm two different places every 6 months. And then I was asked to do an interim for a bishop who was retiring but couldn't have a synod assembly. And I really toyed with that one. Mostly because it would have been mostly distance stuff. But I went, nah, I don't want to do that. I was on one committee in the Southwest Minnesota Synod. Bishop Anderson asked me to be on it, and which shall remain nameless. And I soon realized I don't like being on committees when I'm not in charge.
Hmm.
And that's one of my demons. But as soon as it's like Jesus died for this meeting. I'm sorry, but I died about a half hour ago. Now let's get out of here.
My dad's name was Chuck Aussie, so just want you to just remember. He's only been gone a year and a half, so
Oh, bless his heart. Yeah.
lovely way to remember him.
But and by the way, you do have to think through things like, do you want to do any supply preaching? Do you want to be available for congregations? Last year, we were at Herb Chilstron's funeral down here. And of course, the bishop in the synod was there. And she also happened to be at the church we attended at the time the following week. Well, I was right behind her in the recessional. And so he's just introduced ourselves and she asked about me and as soon as she found out that I said I was recently retired, her eyes just lit up.
Yes, they do.
No, because she needs pastors in her synod, and so I had sworn an oath to both my wife and myself before retirement that I would not do anything for at least a year or more. And so I just said, no, I'm just not available. But you need to think that through. some people will come to a conclusion or a decision other than mine for all kinds of reasons. But I knew that I can't do it.
I've done a little bit of supply preaching now, all post or since COVID started. So it's really weird. I mean, because you're talking to a camera. I'm telling you guys anything, this is normal for you. But I did do 2 little churches that had in-person worship just before we left to come down here in 2 small towns. And God, it was fun. It was just, I mean, I was like, I'm going to pay you. You don't pay me. I mean, this is sweet. And I'll continue doing that if anybody wants me, because it doesn't take a lot of preparation, because you've got a lot of stuff inside your souls through the years. And it's a little spending money, and it's a real perk to what we do.
Yeah, as the number of pastors retire, I think we're hitting kind of a bubble. So that's going to be probably even more pressure, to not retire completely.
Yeah, you're not kind of hitting the bubble. You're right in the middle of it. Yep.
Yeah.
My successor, she called me a year or so ago, and she just said, "Thanks a lot." And I said, "Oh God, what did I do wrong now?" And she said, "You retired, and then everybody else started to retire, and there's just not enough bodies out there to replace them." But the church will go on.
I think once Art tells the congregation that he's retiring, they're going to say why, because our last interim pastor was 80 when we started theirs.
Was that Paul?
Yes.
I did my homework, though, in regard to our synod's policy on when you should announce to your congregation. And John told me yesterday that they have no hard and fast rule, but the suggestion is between 3 and 6 months out. So I'm hitting the 5-month mark. So one of the things I did yesterday was send an email to our congregational president and vice president, inviting them to a pre-council Zoom meeting next week to talk over with them the fact that I want to announce to the council on Wednesday night that I have plans to retire. So I think, having worked through it with a couple of colleagues today, I feel good about it. Yesterday, I felt a little, kind of, I'm not sure about this right now. It made me feel a little guilty, like they're going to feel like I'm abandoning them in the middle of this COVID crisis. But by the end of June, we should have most of it ironed out.
We're going to have a lot of people really panicky because Art and I do the majority of the Zoom stuff. We have other people that do slides, but I run the camera. When we are in church for worship, I'm running the computer to do live and Zoom and then Facebook later and the radio stuff. So
yeah, my hope is that they will raise their sense of urgency to learn the technology.
That actually makes me wonder if Mark and Rick had any succession planning that they had to start after they announced that there were things that needed attending, but until you announced it couldn't really happen, or there wasn't motivation for it.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We had been talking about retirement for several years in terms of knowing that we would be maybe retiring a little early, and having been in that congregation for really a long time, I started to think about the ways that I overfunctioned. And this is like 3-4 years ahead of time, maybe 5 even, recognizing that all pastors probably overfunction in some way. And so I started to try to figure out, well, how am I overfunctioning? And I began to work at that in terms of how do I set things up so that when I do retire, all the stuff that's up here is somewhere on paper, in other people's heads. I probably worked at that for 2 or 3 years. People weren't aware of that's what I was doing, but it was, because because of the way I functioned in that congregation.
Yeah.
I needed to disperse some of that knowledge and history and other things. So that helped me leave the congregation a little less feeling like I had abandoned them, because that feeling is there. For me, it was. And knowing that I had spent a few years working on it that helps a lot. We did succession planning, together with the assistant of the bishop. I mentioned that Tuesday night. I met with her 1.5 years before I retired, and we met several times to talk it through, and talked it through with congregational leaders and a few other pastors too, because I wanted to be more intentional about the process, and I didn't think the congregation would be well served with the traditional, normal call process. So that took a lot of planning ahead of time.
Yeah, and for Mark's, maybe throw my perspective in, 2 things made his in some ways different. Is one is the tenure, the length of your tenure, and I'm assuming the size of your congregation, because the larger congregations get, the more complex they get. And so it context does impact. Like Brenda said, that was such a good example. Is there's things we do that when we're gone, somebody else has to do, or they don't get done at all. And with COVID, things you do are necessary. So having more time to prep those people is good.
Mm-hmm. And you also have to realize that some things that you do as a pastor, that they probably won't get picked up, and it's going to get a little bumpy for somebody. But you for example, one of the things that we don't have, Faith in Winona it was a medium-sized congregation, but we were structured like a larger congregation, I would say. And we had some staff, that sort of thing. But on Sunday morning, if it was snowing, we didn't have a custodian. So on Sunday mornings, if it was snow on the sidewalk and that sort of thing, I did the snow shoveling. So, and I let them know ahead of time, well ahead. I've mentioned it several times, I'm the one who shovels the snow on Sunday mornings. So it wasn't a surprise, but I'm sure it was still a little bit rough whenever it snowed last year or this year even, who knows.
When I was elected bishop, I didn't retire then, but the congregation I left, we worshiped about 500 people on a weekend. So it was, not a huge church, but in the top 5% of the ELCA. And the way my synod's calendar was scheduled, from the Sunday I got elected bishop, it was 3 weeks before I was gone. So this congregation had to figure out, what do we do in 3 weeks? And they did it because we functioned, like Mark said, like a large church, because it was very staff-led and staff-dependent, I think in a healthy way. So they just stepped up, and we had a very capable intern who stepped up. And, so there's lots of different ways to do it, but you just got to be aware. Time comes, you're not going to be there anymore.
I learned 2 other things today that I want to pass along to Joyce, seeing as she has indicated she's the next one in the bunch here that is planning to retire. I spoke with Joyce Grau, who is a colleague from Southwest Minnesota here, who retired at the end of September. She said, number one, get the form from the Synod office that you have to fill out in order for the Synod Council to approve your retirement, or you can't retire. So that's number one. And then second, she said, notify Portico so they send you out the pre-retirement financial packet that they have prepared. So you can start looking at that.
Because Portico retirement and Synod retirement are like, I used to say, it's like a railroad track. They run parallel, but they're not the same thing. And you can tell Portico you're retired and you can still be on the roster as an active clergy. Yeah. So you have to do both. And your Synod, they'll help you do it. They do it every day. Not every day, but yeah.
Probably more than they want right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Art. I was curious what you would learn.
Thank you, Art.
Yeah, that's
You're
great.
welcome.
I don't know if we're going to move on, but I had made a note when Mark was speaking about making new friends. And I wanted to lift up the distinction of when you go to a new congregation or a new call and people learn about you, the wonderful things about you, and experiencing that joy and delight in who you are from other people. It's one thing when you're a religious leader, and it's wonderful, but it's a very different thing as a friend. For people to just be discovering the things about you as a person, not the religious leader, right? Just you, that are so lovely. And probably in both instances, all that learning about each other's wonderfulness helps you bear when you discover some of the less lovely stuff, right? I mean, we need to build that basis. But there, when you're new, there's a real, there's a wonder in that building of the relationship where we have eyes to see the giftedness of one another and to be received with our giftedness in the ways that we shine. COVID has messed it up, but really I can see has thrown a wrench in that process. But it's I don't know, it's a beautiful thing.
I can share, this is pre-COVID, so it's cool. So a year and a half ago, in the summer of, in July of, what year were we, 2019, I did, one of my close friends, he's the bishop in the New England Synod. We discovered we both like to ride bicycles. So one of the first things we did like 4 years ago is we did a 5-day bike ride across Vermont. So then I said, you know, we should do this ride across Iowa. It's called the RAGBRAI, Register Annual Great Bike Ride Across Iowa. They've done it every year for like 40 years. And where you start on the Missouri River and you end on the Mississippi. And he said, let's do it. And then all of a sudden there were 6 other guys who were part of this. And here's the great, it's a great church story because these other 6 guys and my friend were friends back when they worked at a Bible camp in California, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, right? And they'd kind of kept their relationships to a different degree. And then, so the 7 of us were together, you know, every day for 7 days, doing this bike ride across Iowa. And I got 6 new friends, or 5 new friends, I should say. And it's exactly the way you're saying, Corrine. It was just so different. And our bond was, we were all Lutheran. We all worked at Bible camps. We're all Christians, and we ride bikes. Well, 2 of them didn't. 2 of them drove trucks. But and now this summer we're gonna ride the Oregon coast from Washington down to California.
Hmm.
And it's like I got these new friends, and it's so much fun. And it's not because of what I do for a living. It's on a whole different plane in some ways. My brother, the one that has COVID, excuse me, not COVID, but dementia. People in my sermons used to laugh because I always called him the smartest guy I know, because he is. And remember when I was really young, he's 8 years older, I was right out of college. He said, you know, as an adult, if you have 2 to 3 people that you can call close friends, you're blessed. You know, and I'm coming out of college where I got 80 friends, right? And the longer I've lived, I realize he's right. And I've really, in retirement, nurtured those 2 to 3 relationships and tried to identify who they are and name who they are and be really intentional about that. I mean, people I trust, you know, the 2 pastors, these are the people I want to preach at my funeral. That's how I measure it. Yeah. And that changes in retirement.
I look forward to finding those kinds of relationships. When we moved up to this area, and we now live 5 miles, 6 miles away from where we moved in 1990. So the congregation we came to in 1990, everyone in that congregation, for the most part, were everyone who I would have considered friend material, were very friendly, and they're friends on a peripheral basis. But they all grew up in the area. They all had their set friends. They all were related to almost everybody in the area, and they didn't need another friend.
And they all spoke with a Norwegian accent.
They did that too.
And then we moved, you know, to 2 other congregations. Right now we're 25 miles from the congregation. Everybody's there is wonderful, but I'm not connected to them because they're in Benson, I'm east of Sunburn. So they won't remain friends. They'll be Facebook friends, and we'll run into them once in a while. But I am looking for those people that I can be myself with, that will accept me just for who I am and not because I'm pastor's spouse, and want to go to a movie or go out for coffee or whatever, just because they want to do that with me. So I'm looking for the people I can develop that root system with.
Yeah, just to belong because you're you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And Mark touched on this on Tuesday, is we have found that here in Arizona too, in this little over 55 community. We've made some good friends here.
Now you make me want to come south just for the winter, just for that.
It's a good thing.
It's a good place to be.
It is.
I think just to pick up on that, my wife has been much better at those kinds of friendships than I have. She just has been anyways. That's just her nature. And but in retirement, you know, what has really benefited her is the fact that she's really crafty, knitting and quilting and those kinds of things. And so she has these, so she goes to a, you know, down here, the quilting group or the crafting group or the knitting group. And right now they're not doing it quite the way they used to, but they still get together, they sit outside. And she's made some really nice friends through those activities, those hobbies, if you will. I was hoping that I would find that here, but COVID kind of put the kibosh on it, at least temporarily. So, which brings up the fact that one of the things that is beneficial, and I'm saying this because I see it in my wife more so than me, is to have hobbies and interests that will connect you with other people. And when that has happened, that that has benefited in some really, really wonderful ways with respect to friendships. I didn't develop hobbies when I was serving as a pastor. I don't really have any hobbies. I'm a news junkie, which in the past several years has not been a real healthy thing to be. But and you don't go to groups of news junkie groups, that kind of thing. So one of my challenges is to develop those kinds of interests that I will enjoy. I'm kind of thinking golf might be one of them. I'm such a terrible golfer. But it's something I could enjoy that would connect me to other people, and maybe a few other things too. That's something I really need to work on. And if you have those hobbies, you're blessed, and that will help a lot.
Yeah, in these 55 plus communities, that they have kind of, metalworking, woodworking, I've never checked them out, but that there seems to be something for everybody. Is that
Yeah.
the way it is?
Depending on which community the larger the community you're at, the more likely there'll be a wide variety of groups and things. We're in a pretty good size place here, 1,600 plus homes. So there are quite a lot of groups. And there are places that are even much larger that'll have even more. So it's the kind of thing where you have to just, you do some research and you visit and see what it's like.
Yeah.
We have a group we hike with twice a week in the morning and go out into the desert. There's, aerobics in the pool, in the heated pool. It's like 85 degrees. Yeah, and you meet people, and then eventually you just say, I don't really need to meet any more people right now. and that's okay too. And then we take our dog to the dog park, and then we get to meet all these. Both my wife and I agree. We know all the dogs' names, but we don't know the owners' names.
Right. It's just when you had little kids. Oh, you're so and so's dad.
Right. Yeah. It's exactly like that.
Yeah. We walk around here with a 15-month-old granddaughter, and we get to meet all kinds of people.
Oh, that's like raw meat in one of these
Yeah,
places.
Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's just stretch, do what you need to do. And then we'll come back and do some final thoughts. And yeah, right. We'll see you in 25.
I don't know if you guys saw Laura and Tim. This is my Gustavus thermal mug.
Oh, yeah. Who else is good?
Brenda.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
And then there's this Tim Whitworth. I kind of knew him. He was in Atwater.
Naming
He was in Atwater towards the end of when I was in Greenfield. What's he doing? So I got the basketball game queued up.
to the beginning of the game and put it on hold. Okay, because with the Whitewater's home streaming, you can do that. You can do that. So one of the weird things about COVID is that it's caused high schools to perfect their ability to live stream sporting events. And grandma and grandpa, who used to have to choose between which school did you go to and which event did you see, now get to see them all. So we watched a basketball game that started at 4:45 this afternoon with one grandson out in Canby. And I just queued up the beginning of another grandson's basketball game that started a few minutes ago in Whitewater, Wisconsin. So when we're done here, we're going to watch that basketball game. And we don't get to be there in person, but we get to see them all now, and we don't have to pick and choose. And some nights we watch wrestling from Kimball or wherever they're at. So 3 sports in a night.
Yeah, what things will continue, you know, that like what will they keep broadcasting in such a way? Because there is some real benefit to this. It's not the only way, but I'm curious what will stick around post-COVID, right?
Unless they charge for it though, they're losing their income.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So Art, I'm curious, what did you learn from your colleagues that are retired already or soon to be retired?
Well, I found it interesting that Joyce, she's actually moved over to the Rochester area because her mother lives there, and she and Ian are going back to Australia eventually. But right now the transition into Australia is long and hard and expensive. And they don't want to get to Australia and then have to come back because her mom's ill health has led to her death. So they're kind of hanging around.
Living in an Airbnb.
Yeah, waiting for that. But Joyce talked about doing a Sunday of supply preaching and leading worship, and simply saying to the pastor and the congregations that she served over by Rochester, I'll do this for free. I'm retired now. You don't even have to pay me. I'll just do it as a gift to all of the rest of you so that you can time off. And it was fulfilling to be able. So, you know, maybe it won't be such a burden when you get to do it for the fun of it and not because you have to. And most of the time, I mean, it's very fulfilling. Obviously, I've done it for almost 39 years now. You you wouldn't stay with it that long if it didn't do something for you. But it's also stressful. So, I just hope that someday when Mayo Clinic says, here, take your health assessment, and they won't say, boy, you have a lot of stress. You need to get rid of that. And then I answer them back by saying, have you ever been a pastor? Apparently not.
Yeah, I really miss not having you in a tech study, Art.
Well, maybe I'll do stand-up comedy. I mean, I find that as a natural role every once in a while.
Sarah, I was going to tell you that, was it a year ago? Well, before COVID, when we could travel, Kevin and I went to a resort in northern Wisconsin, and we slept most of the week. It was just, what a waste of our money, but it was exhausting.
That's worth every penny. Getting out of Dodge and getting some good sleep. That's money well spent.
I'm so embarrassed. I feel like the last hour, all I've done is yawn. So you're all probably thinking, you better retire soon.
No. I think we all get it. COVID has just really adjusted or disrupted sleeping patterns.
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows why?
Yeah. Well, I thought we could spend a little time on, so this box at the bottom of the sheet that Corinne gave us asks, what can I do to increase my spiritual strength? And, listening to, just some of you reflect on preaching and loving to study and write, but then what's your motivation, right? After that. So for those of you that have yet to retire, what practices do you think, or do you want to keep around that will increase your spiritual strength, that spiritual life that you're used to leading in such a very specific way? And then I'd love for our panelists to talk about how that's been, how your spirits have been strengthened. What practices have you taken up anew or continued that have fed you in this time? So what are your aspirations? What do you hope for in retirement to keep your spirits strengthened?
For me, I can't wait to travel again and be rooted. I love Ireland, been there twice, and I find myself dreaming of going again. There's something about the wildness of the landscape and the Celtic spirituality. So for me, it's continuing to find those places to connect with that Celtic and the land and that spirituality for me. Yeah, I've missed not traveling. Yeah.
Through my career, I've always gotten so much out of text studies, and wherever I moved, I always made sure there was one I could go to. And it's that interaction with others around the word and talking about your faith. I'm thinking I'm going to have to find like a small group or something like that, because I think I've gotten so much out of that in my career, and I don't want to let that go. So that's something I'll have to seek out, I think.
Tim, when I served in northern Minnesota, I would say a quarter of our tech study was retired pastors.
Oh, yeah. See,
really?
There we go.
Yeah.
Wow.
You don't have to be there every week either. When you're retired.
Huh.
Yeah. But talking about faith, talking about God, all those things, I won't be able to just stop. I think that's a part of you, being a pastor, that's something you learn how to do. But so then to have, what does your faith mean to you now that you're not a pastor?
Pastor. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to explore that.
Laura, I loved the devotional you started us with, because I used to work at Rice Hospital in Wilmer, and I would often park in the parking lot behind Bethel Lutheran. And on their back wall, they have the saying, "Be still and know that I am God." And I would see that when I parked my vehicle in the morning. I would see that when I would come out at the end of the day, and it would resonate with me. And sometimes I would just have to sit and in my car before I headed home to remind myself to just be still.
Mm.
So I think I'm hoping for me, I'm hoping for more nature time.
Yeah.
Like I'm a reader, so I probably have read 30 or 40 books since COVID started on downtime. But I am hoping to be able to spend more time in the spring and summer and fall outside reading.
Good.
That's a connecting point for me, and my spiritual strength also is connecting with nature and time outside. And I look forward to having just regular rhythms of not just prayer and devotional life and scripture reading, but that time of connecting with the great outdoors and the Creator.
Mhm.
How about our panelists? What have you done to nurture your spirits, your spiritual strength? You're learning to be pew sitters, but oh, hey, Rick, you're muted. Let's see here. You're still muted, Rick. Hang on.
I don't know.
Well, oh, sorry. I think I just muted you again. Okay.
Now am I unmuted? We're good.
Oh, you're good.
You know, I had that first year and a half of pre-COVID where we could actually go to church and just, you know, in church it's a great church. We got great pastors. It's strong, it's healthy, it's got amazing music. And that's just what fed me. It was just that rhythm of being a part of a church. It was just Sunday morning. It was just what we needed. And nothing was expected of me.
That was my, well, brief experience pre-COVID. And it's really something I'm looking forward to. I too, like Tim was saying, tech study was a really great group and a really positive experience for me. I've kind of decided that I'm not going to seek that out. And partly because I don't really see myself as a pastor in a way. And reconsidering a sense of call is something that I've thought about, I imagine that I know I'm going to seek out a Bible study, and it may take a while to find that, but I think that to me would be really rich and important. If and when I find something, a group like that to be part of, that would feed me a lot. And partly because my whole time as pastor, my study of scripture was all geared towards preaching or confirmation preparation or Bible study preparation, and now I don't do those things anymore. So I have to kind of have a new relationship with what that means. And in a sense, learn how to do devotions in a way that's not geared towards something that's coming up. I haven't been successful in that yet. But I think being part of a worshiping community, and if I can just find one good Bible study, I think that will really fill me up really nicely. The other thing is to learn what it means to have spiritual experiences that aren't connected to a religious practice. That's something that I'm starting to name a little bit more. It's still pretty vague and ambiguous, but having time to walk a mountain trail for a few hours in this desert, which is really interesting around here, has been really nice. I haven't really, I'm still learning what it means to have a spiritual experience in nature, because all my experiences have been religious in nature, not in religious in practice. So I'm learning that too, but it's I'm finding that too in some solitude, walking on mountain trails or kayaking on the lake and things like that.
What questions have not been asked yet, or what comments are you yearning to make?
I guess I'm curious because we know how close we are to retirement. And Joyce, it sounds like you're not too far behind. I'm wondering how long some of the rest of you think it'll be before you retire, and what more you might need before then, or what you learned here that might help.
Yeah, well, I've, that number is a variable thing for us. Rosalie is looking probably to retire before I do. I probably have 7 years left, and but I'm not sure how she's going to do it. But I think we probably won't retire at the same time. So this is just getting us started, just getting in the door to some hopefully discussion time and to talk about things. And our kids are in the play, as far as one's on the West Coast. We got 4 kids, so the other is in St. Paul. And so we've got 3 grandkids, and 2 are out on the West Coast. And tell you, talk about high-priced housing out on the West Coast. It's cheaper. Our kids are trying to buy a house out there, and believe it or not, they qualify for an $800,000 house, and they can't find one that that doesn't need a whole heck of a lot of work. But I mean, that's a whole nother thing. But so anyway, I mean, that's one thing too. Are you going to move and then buy another house? And so we're just really starting to look at those things. And to be honest, when you're working, it's like, I can't ever quit. I mean, is there a day where we can quit doing this? So now, I've stopped to ponder that, and yes, there is. So, so that in and of itself has really been helpful for me, because now I'm thinking about it and I'm actually getting excited and do something else,
I think for me, how I processed all of that, Tim, was I was always going to work till I'm 70. And I had that in my brain. I was just going to do that. And that would be another 3 years. But then as Ron and I started to dream and to talk about what retirement might look like, for us, it was always, where do we retire to? We don't have children. I was 40, he was 44 when we were married. But my father at 98 is still very, very active. We have a farm in South Dakota. My dad's in the cities. So that was always a barrier of where would we retire. And once we started the conversation of, well, what's halfway in between? What about this? What about this? So keep the conversation going and you'll know when the time is right. Yes, you will be able to give it up. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, I feel really good. I don't know what Art's thinking, but for me, it's kind of coming as a relief. No more. This was my last annual meeting last Sunday. You know, you begin to look at life and ministry differently when you have a date or a year out there. Would you agree, Art? I mean,
Yeah, that's exactly right. Most of you know that I was a first call mentor to a lot of pastors in the Southwest Minnesota Synod. I've done it for many, many, many years. And
that's right.
Bill Miller, who lives in New London, was one of my kids. Older than me, but still one of the people that I mentored as a first call pastor. And Bill's philosophy of ministry was, I didn't get ordained until I was 64. But I've got 6 years. I'm going to go hard, and then I'm done. And of course, those of you who are my kids know that Bill was a complete failure at retirement. He lasted 7 weeks and he went back to work and now works half-time at Bethesda as a chaplain in Wilmer. Mary Hovland also retired at the same time. She lasted 7 days and went back as the other half of the chaplain at Bethesda in Wilmer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be like them.
No, I don't either.
And I always thought, well, I can go to 70 and then I'll be like Bill Miller. And as we talked about it this summer, sitting out on the deck, it just came to me that, you know, I got to be me, not Bill Miller. And this seems right to me.
That's right.
You always go for 40.
And I wanted to go to 40 just because it was a good biblical round number. And I've given up that dream and I think it's okay. 39 for me, 1 for COVID, that's enough.
Yeah.
Are you saying, Art, that your ministry has been wandering in the desert?
Pretty much.
Or like a deluge, a flood? I don't understand.
I've maintained my foreign allegiance to that green and yellow team from over east of here. So I am a foreigner.
Do that.
Sarah, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say the two that lasted seven days and 7 weeks?
Yes.
They didn't attend this great retreat about retirement.
Well, and it is interesting. I mean, just I think that the advice that we've been given about knowing what to say no to and to be ready.
Mhm.
And then, you know, I think our no's are going to be different and our yeses are going to be different. And so, so you got to, Art, you got to do you, because you can't retire like anybody else. You're going to be miserable. So
One of the things I learned when I went to grad school, and that's a lot of years now, but I was active in so many things. And I realized if I'm going to work full time and I'm going to do grad school on weekends, and I'm still going to have 3 kids and sports activities and a spouse, and I have to say no to things. And I said no to everything except one thing. There was a young family, mom and dad both sang in the choir at church. I said, I will sit with your kids in church. And I did that. And one of them was an infant. So I got to kind of raise her in church. And that was a blessing to me, and made it possible for them to do what they wanted. But I used my grad school as an excuse. I'm sorry, I can't do that. My plate is full. And learning to say no was hard.
So
But
I'm,
it got easier and more fun as I did it.
well,
You're
you
spicy.
offered a good excuse too. That's great. You know, what did you say, Corinne? Sorry.
Spicy. I like spicy.
Well, Noel and I don't anticipate retiring for another 10 years, but we figure we just need that much time to wrap our minds around it because we don't know where to go. That's our biggest thing, but maybe that'll become clearer.
It'll come clear, yeah.
And I want to start visiting some places so I can check out some of these communities and yeah, so.
That's what Ron and I did. We just kind of drove around to different areas of the state to say, well, what about this? What about this area? So
Where is it going to be, Joyce?
you're not going to believe it. We've Raymond, Minnesota,
Yeah.
which is just south of. There was this house, brand new house. Ron said, I think we should look at it. And he's like, yep, this is it. I think because it's a huge 2-car garage that's heated in Minnesota. I think that's what did it. But no, it's a lot smaller house, 1,200 square feet, but it's been life-giving to know we have a place to call our own to go to and not a parsonage. You know, that's been really huge for me. We haven't closed on the house yet. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. But it just felt right.
Is Ron a putterer? He's got to be out there doing stuff,
Yeah.
puttering in the garage.
Yeah.
You're going to be glad for that garage, as glad as he is.
Yes, I am. It's his dog house.
Oh, now.
Oh, no. So,
Yeah,
And
it worked.
you're both children of the prairie.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It worked for us to travel around a little bit in the years before retirement and just try to imagine ourselves
Right.
here or there. And it was fun to do.
Mhm.
That was something that helped us to begin to imagine and envision ourselves in someplace new that we would want to be. Could I just say something about your sense of call after you get retired? You mentioned our Mary Hovland and Bill Miller. I know both of those folks too from my years in Wilmer, but for some people that's a really important thing to do, to have a part-time call in retirement, partly due to their sense of call, which I suspect is true with Bill and Mary, because that's just who they are, and their call to serve as pastor is really tightly woven with their sense of self, and that's true with a lot of pastors. And if that's the case, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It just is what it is. But you have to be able to then at least say, well, now what does that mean for me or for us, and work with that a bit. For me, most of my call was not tied to who I am, and so it was much easier for me to just feel like I was released from pastoral ministry. But everybody's different in that way. But it's helpful even for me to say, well, what does it mean to have a call to ministry? I have to kind of rethink this if I'm not going to be pastor. Well, when I'm called to ministry, so what does that mean? I hope to be able to be of use in a local congregation that we would join one day, in some way.
Mark, I really appreciate you commenting on that because I have a colleague. I was his final associate pastor, right? I didn't want to try to move up to be the senior pastor at this church because I don't think that often works if you are the associate and move up. But he retired because he felt like he wanted the church to be open to calling a female senior pastor. And then I left a year later, but he retired in 2020 or 2000. And to this day, he's doing interims. And he and his wife just travel wherever. They're in Rocky Mountain Synod, so it's enormous. And they delight in it. And it is their joy. And they would not be as joyful if they weren't doing what they're doing. So, right, you have to figure out what fits for you. That was really wise. I appreciate that.
If you don't, I mean, I do. One of the questions that Laura asked us to consider, what was it again? What did you learn what not to do? Well, some of it, quite frankly, was from observing pastors who really stayed in their call way too long, or they retired and they kept meddling in their congregations because they couldn't imagine that the congregation could possibly live without them. Really, really destructive for the congregation and for themselves, I think. My father has a seminary classmate who he stayed in that. He was a developing pastor and he stayed there for 40, 50 years until he was way too long and terribly enmeshed. It was a really unhealthy situation. And he finally, at the end, had to tell him he had to leave. He got fired. It was devastating for everybody.
Right.
When I became bishop, one of the things my predecessor sat down with me and talked about, he called it the bishop's woodshed. He said this, that one of the hardest things you do is when you have to bring a retired pastor in to the woodshed and talk about boundaries. And I had to do it 3 times where you have to stop this. And these are not bad people and they're not trying to do bad things. They think they're doing the right thing, but they weren't. And they fortunately, all 3 of those conversations produced the desired result. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to just turn that switch off. And figuring out whose needs you're meeting.
Right.
Yeah. So I was talking to my friend in tech study about this because he's going to retire and he figured 3 years. And I said, well, Dean, when you retire, you just gotta stop being a pastor. And he said, I'm not going to be able to do that because it really is a part of his identity.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, thought I'd challenge him a little bit, but
and there's ways you can do that without having bad boundaries. That's fortunate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We talked about that though, because we're 25 miles. We've always lived within, since we moved to this area, we've lived within 40 miles of the congregations that Art has served at. Now we're 25 miles from Benson, where he serves. And we talked that we need to really very soon start setting those boundaries that I will not be able to do this, because he still gets calls every once in a while from a congregation that he served a long time ago. Can you do mom's funeral? You're the only one who really knew her, or those kinds of things.
Or weddings for kids that maybe I confirmed or something like that. And of course, you feel honored that they thought something of you, that they would want you to do that. But there's no way I want to do weddings. I mean, one of my discussions this afternoon with some of my other colleagues was, I have no weddings on the schedule. It better not be anyone wants to get their work before the end. I really don't want
Yeah.
to.
That's hard. No,
I'm done with weddings.
We missed out on one last weekend.
Yeah.
well, from our panelists, are there any final parting words you would want to say that we didn't get, if we didn't get to a specific question that you really wanted to speak to? And you don't have to. I just didn't want to cut you off.
I'm good.
No, it just give it, the kind of time you can do some use your imagination, envision yourself retired, and think about what you need to do to get from here to there. It's wonderful. I really, really enjoy being retired.
Well, it's encouraging to hear you talk like that. Really is.
It is, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to our panelists for
Oh,
sharing and for stirring such good conversation.
Sure.
And thank you all for just participating in the ways that you have. I just want to end our time with prayer together. And it's one of my favorite services. It's just the prayers on 304 in the ELW. And it's my go-to. So, because there's just the breadth and depth of the prayer. So what I'm going to do is just leave some silence after each of the petitions. And then at some point, 2 different points, I'll say, and what do the people of God pray for? And if you would like to say a prayer out loud, you're invited to do that. If you want to continue to pray silently, that's fine too. So, but I will be leaving some good silence after each of the lines of prayer, just for you to add your own silently there. So does that make sense? Okay, all right. The Lord be with you.
Also,
And also with you.
Let us pray. Mighty God of mercy, we thank you for the resurrection dawn, bringing the glory of our risen Lord, who makes every day new. Especially, we thank you for the sustaining goodness of your creation. For the new creation in Christ and all gifts of healing and forgiveness. For the gifts of relationship with others. For the communion of faith in your church. For what else do the people of God pray?
For peace in war-torn countries.
For truth to be recognized.
For unity in our own country.
For hope in the midst of uncertainty.
Merciful God of might, renew this weary world, heal the hurts of all of your children, and bring about your peace for all in Christ Jesus, the living Lord. Especially, we pray, for those who govern nations of the world. For the people in countries ravaged by strife or warfare. For all who work for peace and international harmony. For all who strive to save the earth from carelessness and destruction. For the Church of Jesus Christ in every land. For what else do the people of God pray? O God, you have called your servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths as yet untrodden, through perils unknown. Give us faith to go out with good courage, not knowing where we go, but only that your hand is leading us and your love supporting us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
And I want to bless you with these words. Just as the angels say, God is with you, may you trust in God's favor for you and for the universe. May you lean into the grace of Jesus, which is ready for you at every moment. And may you be reinvigorated by the creativity and power of the Holy Spirit that will not leave you alone. Amen.
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 Go in peace with the Lord.
Thanks be to
Thanks
God.
be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Be to God.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Corrine.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Yep.
Peace, peace, peace.
Peace.